I'm very happy to have you, Adrian. And yeah, I'm thankful that you said yes. And I think it took just a few days to arrange this. So
Yeah,
thankful that you're being so fast. And I would like to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself to the listeners, and then let's go.
yeah. Thanks, Elliot. Thanks for having me, and yeah, thanks for reaching out on Twitter, X, I guess we call it now. Always a good place to connect with people in the robotics and AI space, I think. Quick introduction on myself, Adrian Macneil. I'm the founder and CEO at Foxglove. Foxglove is building a cloud platform for robotics. We're most well known for our visualization tool, which for those in the robotics industry that are familiar with ROS, you can think of it as a sort of a modern cross-platform cloud-connected version of our Viz. And we are also building out things in the data management space and increasingly into the on-robot sort of experience as well.
Um, Thanks. That was insightful. I mean, this is now the pitch from the founder itself, so this is awesome to hear.
Yeah, yeah,
And yeah, we will spend some time on the company later on. Always start the podcast with you giving the opportunity to maybe we can spend some time on your upbringing and the environment that you grew up with. Because I'm always trying to find patterns and then trying to find out what kind of environment is it that an entrepreneur comes out of it.
yeah, definitely. So I grew up in New Zealand, born in New Zealand, and actually I moved out to the States about 10 years ago. But yeah, I grew up in New Zealand in a sort of relatively small town. And, New Zealand's obviously a fairly small country as well, about 5 million people, I think now. Both of my parents sort of always had entrepreneurial type things going on. They ran a B&B before I was born, I think, and then my mum ran a drama academy when I was growing up, and my dad was always sort of doing the books and things for that on the side of his other job. So, and I also think New Zealand tends to have a lot of small business, not so many big large companies. So a lot of my friends' parents were also entrepreneurial and they were running small businesses. So I think I was just always exposed to that from an early age. And then growing up, I went to college in New Zealand. I did a computer science degree at a university, most well known for its agriculture, and um,
Is
and
that the
then
South or the North Island? If
in
you
the
don't
North
mind.
Island, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So I grew up on the east coast of the North Island. But yeah, did computer science there, and I've always been sort of interested in starting companies. I was always, even through high school and college, I was always trying to get little things off the ground, side businesses here and there. Quite early on, I think, was always interested in doing startups, and through college and after college was trying to do startups. But when I was younger, I found that I quite often was very impatient. I guess I would start a startup idea, and then like a month later or 2 months later, it like hadn't blown up to be the size of Airbnb or something. So get frustrated and move on to the next thing. Don't
It's
really have the
it's
patience.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say this because I think nowadays this is being communicated much more openly. But the expectation that everyone has, right? And you are, I mean, nowadays it's much more than when I guess when we were young,
Right.
surrounded by the all the social media and seeing all those people doing 10 and 30K, especially on Twitter, you see a lot of gurus, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
realizing that it takes much more time and it's much more difficult and so interesting that you say you had this kind of feeling that no matter what I start, it needs to be like blown up within a few weeks. So
Yeah.
interesting that you
Yeah.
said. Did you overcame this, or did you continue doing this for a little bit longer until it hit you that?
I think it just came with age. When I was younger, like I say, I mean, you always hear the stories of the outliers, right? And it was always like, well, Mark Zuckerberg started Facebook, and like a year later, it was like a billion people or something. I mean, I'm sort of exaggerating, but those were the stories back then. And now I think still you always hear the stories that get amplified are the ridiculous outliers. But the vast majority of companies are started by people later in their career. The vast majority of sort of larger companies, and the vast majority of overnight successes take 10 years. So it's I think it just kind of came with age, realizing that, I think, and having sort of gone and worked at a few startups. We can kind of get into that, but going and sort of seeing how the sausage was made, I guess, working at other startups and seeing, oh yeah, it actually just takes like years and years of grinding away at a problem before you have success at it. it finally sort of dawned on me that really you shouldn't start a company at all. And I say this, it's fine, especially when you're young. If you're into entrepreneurial sort of mindset, start everything you want by all means, have side businesses and do all of this stuff. But if you're going to start a startup or like a sort of venture-backed startup and you want to make a real business out of it, I think you shouldn't go into that expecting to spend any less than 10 years on it. Basically, like if you can't see yourself working on a problem for 10 years, then it's not worth starting, because it's just like how long it's realistically going to take to either be successful or to get some kind of exit. Especially if it's successful, you're going to be working on it for many more than 10 years. So you better be excited about the problem. Otherwise, you're going to get bored pretty quickly.
It's interesting that you're combining two things here, because I'm always throughout the episode I'm listening and taking notes for what could be the title for the episode, right? And here you say, don't start a company where you're not able to stick with the problem for longer than 10 years. But then you also say, you just using the word problem in the first place is interesting, because especially in deep tech, a lot of people, I mean, I hear this very often. They don't start with the problem, they start with the technology. So some companies are developing a product and spending a lot of time developing the technology, not really figuring out what kind of problem it solves versus I have a solution here, let's find a problem that fits to my solution, right? But please.
Yeah, definitely. And I think of it as a problem space, right? Like quite often what you set out to solve is not the thing that you end up solving. There's plenty of startup stories of people who, started out thinking that they were solving one problem and ended up solving a completely different problem. But usually it's kind of in the same space. It's relatively rare that you have these sort of complete pivots, like something like Slack that started off as a gaming platform and then turned into like a B2B corporate communications platform. Those are kind of rare, but usually you sort of start out with something and you end up in a slightly adjacent problem space, but you're still excited in this kind of this sort of problem space.
And coming back to what you said, so you have been surrounded by small or medium-sized companies or parents that were doing their own thing, and being to university and then maybe seeing that kind of startup-ish world. I do remember that New Zealand was quite in the use around the year 2000, but mainly through film industry and 3D rendering and these kind of things. So this was the first thing that came up to my mind when you said that. But maybe you can take us back in time. How was that, and what was around this university, college, computer science world you were in?
Yeah, I think it was always, there was never as much interest in the sort of technology industry. Like you said, the sort of film industry was quite relatively large in New Zealand, but New Zealand is primarily known for agriculture, or its primary export is agriculture and tourism. So a lot of the sort of mindset of New Zealand is a lot around like farming and sheep and beef and dairy and things like this. But I always, since I was a very small child, was interested in computers and technology. So I grew up in, out of college, I ran a small web design agency with a friend, and we're building websites for people, supporting ourselves that way. But always reading things online, and was reading about Silicon Valley and watching these things about startups and reading all the stories and all of the books and wanting to do that and wanting to do something bigger. So that was what ultimately brought me to the States. Before that, I did actually spend a couple of years in Australia as well, working at a startup. So that was, I guess, the sort of first startup that I joined after getting out of this kind of early years. The first startup that I joined in Australia was basically trying to build an Airbnb for long-term rentals. So it was sort of finding more like roommates and things that you would keep for years at a time. I think that turned out to have this very obvious problem of it's very difficult to monetize that type of thing, because people looking for roommates like don't have much money and they don't want to spend much, and B, we sort of people keep disintermediating you. So you have this sort of problem of, with Airbnb and with Uber and things like this, you're always getting matched with a different person. So it's a natural place for the marketplace to sort of take a cut on matching you. But next time you book an Airbnb, it's always a different one. So you don't have the sort of disintermediation problem. The people that tried to build marketplaces, in our case around roommates, or in other cases, people tried to build like cleaning marketplaces and things like that. But you're always kind of getting matched with the same person. So there's an incentive to just disintermediate. Like once you've kind of met someone, you don't need the marketplace anymore. So you just talk to them out of banding, like, well, we can just cut the middleman out here and pay you directly. So that startup only lasted about a year, but I got some experience from it.
Sorry, which year was that?
That would have been 2013, I think. Yeah, 2012, 2013. So it was right after, Airbnb started getting really big. Around, I think, maybe like 2011, 2012. I tried to build an Airbnb clone for New Zealand at one point, but again, got bored of it after 2 months because it didn't explode. So didn't blow up. It's like I say, it was sort of the impatience that comes with that comes with my youth. But yeah, and then I sort of really got into crypto through 2013. One of the things that I had done earlier in my career, when I was doing the web agency with a friend, is I built this e-commerce platform. It was a PHP e-commerce platform, and I was selling that, making good money just selling copies of this PHP e-commerce platform. And through that, I ended up doing integrations with about 30 or 40 different payment gateways, different payment sort of processing providers. So something like Stripe is sort of ubiquitous now, but back then it was just this like mishmash of like dozens and dozens of companies that all provided payment processing, and they all had APIs that had been designed in sort of like the late 90s, early 2000s, and they were all just incredibly terrible to work with. But through building this e-commerce framework, I had done payment gateway integrations with a lot of these different, and I was like extremely frustrated with how complicated it was sort of moving money around programmatically. And that was why when Bitcoin came out, I guess, like, first of all, I dismissed it as a scam like everyone does at first. But then I sort of started reading a bit more, and it's like, oh, this is really cool. It's kind of like an open source programmable money. That really appealed to me since I'd spent so much time fighting with writing payment gateway integrations. So I applied to a job at Coinbase, and that was when I first moved out to the Bay Area to Silicon Valley in 2014.
Do you, I mean, do you belong to the glorious ones? They were able to read about it, think about it, and took action on Bitcoin in that early phase?
Yeah, look, I did, but I have some funny stories there. So I joined, so I got this job at Coinbase in 2014. That's when I moved out to San Francisco, and Coinbase was a wild ride. I was only there for less than 2 years, and through the whole period I was there, I mean, Bitcoin, I joined early 2014, was like right at the peak of the first bubble, I think. So it got to about $1,000. It had been sort of, well, there was little peaks before that. It went from $2 to $30 or something, and then back down, and then it went from $20, and it ended 2013, beginning of 2014. I think it got up to like $1,000 per Bitcoin or something. And this was super early days. Like the first Bitcoin that I bought was like, you meet a guy in a street and hand them a wad of cash, and they like do some things on your phone or something, or you send money to just a random person's bank account and hope that they send you Bitcoin. But yeah, joining Coinbase, like I said, it was kind of right at the start of this, or right when I joined, it was right at the peak, and then it was basically all downhill from there. So when I joined Coinbase, Coinbase did this thing called a work trial, which we do at Foxglove, which is that after the interview process, you go and work with the company for a week, and just as a contractor. And so when I remember I went to do my work trial at Coinbase, the company was tiny. Like I think I was maybe the fourth engineer or something. I think there were like a few other.
Crazy.
There was like, yeah, Brian, the CEO, was like still committing code every day, and there was like a couple of other engineers working there. But I showed up to the Coinbase office, and I'd visited San Francisco before, but this was sort of first time moving to San Francisco. I want the startup experience. I want to see like what does it take to build a Silicon Valley startup. So I show up to the Coinbase office Monday morning, and the office, first of all, the office is just like a condo, like an apartment in an apartment building. Nice. It's like a one bedroom apartment or something. And the bedroom has like a few laptops and then like a mattress on the floor, a few desks and like a mattress on the floor. And the living room is just like a bunch of desks and stuff everywhere. And then like, the recruiter is like taking calls in the laundry or in the bathroom or something. And I was like, what is going on here? But anyway, and then that was like this was Monday that I joined, like on board. All right, here's your work trial project for the week. Great. And then about like 2 hours later, we got the news that was when Mt. Gox. So Mt. Gox was like the first Bitcoin exchange. And that was when it sort of came out that Mt. Gox was insolvent and that they'd lost everybody's money. So I was like, all right, off to a good start.
Nice.
And so they were like, everyone was frantically running around, and they got some like some community member, some like respected Bitcoin community member that was nothing to do with Coinbase came in and sort of they did some ceremony to prove that sort of Coinbase was solvent, and that reassure everyone that we had not lost all their money as well. And then because there was kind of concerns about like collateral spillover, like if Coinbase had money with Mt. Gox, we would have lost it, kind of thing. But I think they didn't. I think they had moved off Mt. Gox like a long time before when the signs started showing. Anyway, that was like Monday, and then I think the Wednesday we hit like 1 million users or something, 1 million signups, and so like the Wednesday we're like up on the roof like celebrating and popping bottles of champagne or whatever. And I was like on the roof of some random apartment building in summer.
Crazy.
And yeah, so I was just like, all right, cool. Well, this is the startup experience, I guess. This is what I was looking for. So joined Coinbase, but then, kind of tying it back to, I was only there for less than 2 years, and basically the whole time I was there, like the price of Bitcoin just went downhill. So, and the usage of Bitcoin was, it's kind of very obvious in hindsight now. You can look back at the past sort of 18 years or something of Bitcoin. When was it founded? Yeah, like, I don't know, 16, 17 years ago now. You can look back at this whole period of time and you can see that, every 4 years there's kind of like a hype cycle and then there's a lull. But that wasn't obvious at the time. And I think so through sort of 2014, 2015, kind of lost enthusiasm for the Bitcoin space because, I was like, the price is going down. And as a result, like the interest in it's going down and the usage numbers are lagging and Coinbase wasn't doing so well at the time. It certainly wasn't clear. So I basically left Coinbase convinced that Bitcoin was going to zero. Like sold most of my Bitcoin, and I was like, no, this is this is not going to work. So like, don't take financial advice from me. Is the moral of the story.
Thanks first for including that sentence that might keep us out of legal trouble. But I mean, I don't want to get too much into this conversation, but the only funny story is that you can on WhatsApp here in Europe, you use mainly WhatsApp on communications, and you can make a little star on a message, so you can find it easier. And one of my best friend. So I remember that when you talked about this, right? And every now and then I forward him his own message from 2013. Please praise me as the financial god. And because he was heavily invested, and I think he now owns still one, but back then it was much more. So yeah. But thanks for giving an insight. I mean, being in that very early stage of Coinbase, interesting. But just for clarification, so New Zealand is a small place, relatively small place, and not so much tech heavy. And then you go to Australia. I've been in a startup, and then you move to San Francisco, which is the place of all the startup places, right? And was that something that was easy for you? Was that something that were you one of a lot of people from New Zealand, or were you like on your own? So I'm always trying to understand what was your where are you surrounded by friends that doing the same kind of things, or is that something that everyone was doing it, so I was doing it as well, or was that something that no one else was doing because everyone else was going and doing some local stuff or some, as you said, agriculture or some local businesses? Well, how was that for you to go to the US?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there's definitely I was leaving behind all of my friends and community and things, and most people that I knew I guess within New Zealand, so the mindset in New Zealand and Australia is that most people after they leave college will go and do what we call an OE, an overseas experience. And because New Zealand and Australia are so far from the rest of the world, or at least there's kind of this mindset. I mean, now flights and everything get a lot cheaper, but there's still this mindset of like we're miles away from the world. And so most people, I wouldn't say most people, but like it's very common to go and do a few years overseas. Most people in New Zealand, some of them go to, if they do an OE for a few years, some of them go to Australia, a lot of them go to Canada, a lot of them go to the UK and London. There's, tons of Kiwis in London. Not so many come to the US, mostly because it's a lot harder to get a visa. So most countries, a lot of countries in the world have this working holiday visa. So for people under 30, generally you can go and work for up to a year and be employed. And that's quite common. And then quite often after a year of working, you've already got a job and someone's willing to sponsor you for a work visa. And so there's this kind of reciprocal arrangement where a lot of countries are doing this. And so a lot of people, a lot of my friends either stayed in New Zealand because especially the more entrepreneurial friends were sort of in New Zealand doing businesses, so they didn't really leave. But a lot of other friends went to London and things like this. Almost no one I knew at the time moved to San Francisco. But that said, I think it didn't matter too much. San Francisco, first of all, I guess I met my wife in New Zealand. So she's American and she was traveling around. We met in New Zealand. So she actually had no interest in moving back to the States. She was pretty happy in New Zealand, but I convinced her that we got to go.
And where she's from?
So she's from the Bay Area. So she grew up in Palo Alto. So she had family there, but like I said, she was not really interested in moving back, but I talked her into it. And then also other than that, not having any friends arriving in San Francisco, but it didn't matter because there's so many new people. I mean, San Francisco is a city of people that have just moved there. I mean, there's a lot of people that have been around for a long time too. But if you're in your 20s and you show up in San Francisco, there's events that you can go to every night of the week and meet people. And most of us at Coinbase at the time, a lot of Coinbase was people that had just moved to San Francisco. A lot of people at Coinbase had just moved to the States as well. There was a lot of people that had come from Europe, from Finland. A couple of the guys, Jory and Kari, that started Linear, the project management tool, they were at Coinbase in the early days. There's a few guys from Slovenia that joined. There was just like a lot of international people, and there's also just a lot of people in general that we're all in our 20s. And by the way, the founders are also like mid 20s. So you can imagine it was basically just like a company full of like young people that had just moved to the Bay Area. So there was a whole community of people. And I think you can build a community really quickly in San Francisco. In fact, it's very difficult not to. If you move to San Francisco and don't know anyone, you're going to have friends very soon, especially if you join a startup or anything like that.
Yeah, but this is, I was just curious because I mean, everyone who was at this kind of age and immersed himself or herself in this kind of environment can really good understand what you're saying, right? There's almost no time for feeling lonely, or there's almost no time for having time to think about these kind of things, right? But I was just curious to understand. I mean, because this is so far away and it's so much different. Everyone, I mean, I can understand your wife. I think everyone who made who was in New Zealand for vacation can understand that this is a fairy tale place. It can be, right. I mean, it has. I think every place has its up, its down, but it is so wonderful and so peaceful and so quiet. 5 million people on those islands, right? I mean, I'm from Berlin, so the city itself has like 3.5 million people, and so it's very nice. And then throwing yourself back into this epicentrum of entrepreneurship and young people willing to work very hard and so many ideas, and the vibe seems to be very special. So thanks for giving those insight.
Yeah. I think the other thing is I think of it as, and people ask me today, should I move to San Francisco? And my sort of response to that is it depends what you want to do with your life, right? Like if you want to do something big, or you want to work at startups and sort of say you had an impact and you're excited about technology, like yes, you should move there for the same reason that if you want to become a world, a famous actor or something, you move to LA, right? You're not going to like become a famous actor and stay in New Zealand or
San Francisco,
whatever random town you grew up in America, or right. You want to be an actor, you're going to move to LA. If you want to work in finance and you want to work at the top of your game in finance, then you're going to move to New York, or you're going to move to London, or Singapore maybe. But like, yeah, if you want to do something big with your life, you should move to where everyone else that's doing that is, so that you're surrounded by people. I really like this concept of you are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. And so you want to surround yourself with other people doing that. And time and time again, you see these examples of, people talk a lot about these like mafias, right? It's like the PayPal mafia or whatever, and all of these kind of, now they say the Coinbase mafia, and they do it for like basically every company now. It's like, oh, look at all the people that were there early at that company, and now they've gone off to start all these other things. But it's not a coincidence, because you build these networks and you see you get to see upfront what it takes to be super successful. Same with, you want to be a famous musician or something. Same thing. You probably, there's a bunch of different places you can sort of become famous in music, but you're surrounding yourselves with other people that have that same mentality, and other people that are looking to be sort of world class and at the top of their game, versus being surrounded like primarily with people that are working. For example, if I stayed in New Zealand, primarily people that are, maybe they're exciting, maybe they're entrepreneurial, but they they're in like hospitality or something like that. They run a bar, or they, other things like that. But you're not surrounding yourself with other people that are focused on building like big technology companies.
You said being the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, right? And one of the reasons why I have this podcast is I really would like people to listen to these kind of stories, because what also happens if you're surrounded by these people, these people very well because you spend so much time with them, right? So when they become successful, the barrier of trying to do something similar is not as high, or the threshold, because you've seen the other side of this person's personality, and this person, for example, is a messy, or this person never sleeps, or this person
right.
never works out, or it doesn't have all to be negative characteristics, but this if he can do it, I can do it attitude is this is something that I like. This is the reason why I have this podcast, because when you hear this kind of stories, and there's some very weird stories in this is the 50th episode, first episode of the second season. And you hear stories where you think, dude, this is it seems like a makeup story, right? But these stories are true. And the thing is, as you said, these PayPal mafia, it's because people have been they've seen what it takes to become successful and what's important. And I think this is the reason why I would like to have this podcast, to inspire people and also show behind the scenes that it's normal people, right?
It's just people. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you see, that's 100% right. You see 2 things. One is you see the level of sort of focus and intensity that it takes to, for example, build a big company. But like I say, I think this is generally applicable. This framework is applicable to anything. You want to be a famous actor, you want to be a famous musician, or like I said, you want to be, very successful in finance, or any of these kind of industries. And academia too, like working sort of alongside and under people who are at the top of their game and being able to learn from them gives you 2 things. One, it shows you the intensity and focus and sort of the level of dedication that's needed. But also, to your point, it shows you that they're just people too, and they make mistakes, and they have personality flaws. And so you do also, kind of like you said, you get this sense of like, well, if they can do it, then I can do it. Like, it's not that hard. You just sort of, you kind of learn the game. And that was very much true from, for example, Coinbase, and then later on we'll get to, I joined Cruise, but at Coinbase, I was working directly, reporting to Brian Armstrong, the CEO of Coinbase, and and Coinbase has been wildly successful, and it's a $75 billion company, and it's the biggest company in crypto, and all of these things. But also, it's like, yeah, that was Brian. We just went rock climbing together every week, and he's like, he was goofy and made jokes, and like, it's just a person. Like, people put them up on these pedestals, and when you meet people later in life, sure, you meet them 10 years later, and they're wildly successful, and it's very hard to sort of reach those people, and it's very hard to interact with them. And even if you got a job now, meeting the CEO when you join a company with thousands of people is very intimidating, and usually they're focused on getting work done. But getting to see sort of the early stages of companies like that is very important, because you get to know the more human side of people, and get to know them as a person. And you see they're just a person. They have they have their faults, and they're learning too, and it's the first time they've done this as well, and so it sort of makes it more approachable.
You did some name dropping here, so Cruise was mentioning as well. I mean, spend as much time with them as you like, but I'm really interested in, because I'm from the robotics scene, so and this is where I know my stuff best. And there's a few things that coming out of Europe. There's a little bit of it seems like more dynamic in the last few weeks and months when talking about Europe, and so I'm very excited about these things. First, the first time you popped up in my feed was when Audro was mentioning Rust, and he was mentioning maybe he did a collabo with you guys, but somehow he was mentioning you guys, so I looked you guys up. And so maybe you can tell me a little bit about I mean, if you have a nice interesting story about Cruise, I'm always interested in that, because in Europe you don't see any of these kind of cars and companies, even though we used to have one of the biggest car making industry in the world. Inventing the car. No one came up with the idea to invest in self-driving cars. So this is a bash. Anyone who's listening to this, I mean this as a bash. Yeah. So
there is one good shout out to Wave though. Wave is well, maybe it's not Europe now since there's Brexit, but Wave is in the UK. They're doing some really good self-driving stuff. But
I mean,
I should. Yeah, I'll talk. I'll sort of touch on Cruise, because I think it's important. Like sort of coming out of Coinbase, like I said, I really burned out on the crypto space quite quickly, because I just sort of apart from the fact that it was just was sort of generally down. I got to a point where I didn't see a lot of sort of value being delivered to people. I didn't really, again, coming back to what problem was it solving? I still like crypto sort of from the technological perspective. It's cool, programmable money and all of this kind of things, a decentralized ledger and all of this stuff is quite cool. But in terms of just how is it going to help my mom? Or apart from they invest in it and they make money, and it's sure, okay, cool, it's good for that, but what is it going to do to the day-to-day lives of people besides being a store of value, which is and I say that a little bit in jest. There's a lot of benefit to, especially in sort of non-first world countries where there's a lot less sort of financial stability. It's quite good, but generally, I don't know, I couldn't see as direct of a line of sight to how it was going to bring value to the world. And so my co-founder at Foxglove, Roman, we were at Coinbase together, and then he went to Cruise, and he was just going on and on about self-driving cars, and I was like, self-driving cars, that's ridiculous, what are you talking about? This is impossible. But then he went to Cruise, and he sort of dragged me over to Cruise, and I hadn't done anything in the kind of robotics space before that. I mean, now it's that was 8 years ago or something. So I've learned a lot over the past almost decade. But coming in there, I'd mostly been building web stuff before then, web and infrastructure and things. And I came into Cruise and I was like, well, I don't know what I'm going to be able to do to help a self-driving car company. I don't know anything about, I hadn't really done hadn't done much ML or anything like that, apart from some classes in college. But hadn't done that, hadn't really done anything with hardware. But showed up at Cruise, and I very quickly realized that robotics is a extremely multidisciplinary field. And it was clear, when I first showed up, sort of came over for lunch and started talking to people and started getting excited about it. It was clear that it just takes a lot of different skills. I hadn't internalized how many different skill sets it takes to build robots, basically. And a self-driving car is just a giant robot on wheels, robot car, basically. So there's hardware engineers, and there's mechanical engineers and electrical engineers, and then there's ML engineers, and there's a lot of research scientists, and there's controls PhDs, and there's like a lot of these kind of disciplines. And then I showed up with like a web and infrastructure background, but I was one of the only, it's one of like very few people there who understood like infrastructure and web concepts and server communication protocols and things like this that I just took for granted. I was like, oh, this stuff's easy. I don't know how to make the car drive itself, but like, building a web app is easy. I thought, but it turns out, like you say, there's all of these disciplines and nobody really knows everything. There's, you sort of need specialists in all these areas. So it was the thing that kind of drew me to it was like, number one, I can see a lot of value for this coming back to, again, it's like the mom test, like, is this going to be helpful for my mom? I was like, oh my God, this is going to be amazing. Like, yeah, like, I don't know if we, how long it's going to take, but self-driving cars, way more obvious utility to the world than crypto. It was just like, this is something that is going to, very much change the world and change people's lives. But then also I can see how I can contribute to it because I knew how to build a bunch of server stuff and infrastructure stuff. And as I kind of got into developer tools and things. So, I joined Cruise, and same thing. When I joined Cruise, it was about 25 engineers or something, 25 engineers. I think the whole company was maybe 40 people. And I stayed there for 5 years. And I think by the time I left, the company was about 2,000 people, maybe a little bit more. So again, same thing, right? Like you put yourself in these situations, and I think this is very important for anyone that wants to get into doing a startup themselves or things like that. You need to go and look for companies that are on a success trajectory, but a very early stage, and go and learn what it looks like to grow from 40 people to 2,000 people over the course of a few years, and what it looks like to kind of do these things. So that was my journey at Cruise was I led the infrastructure and the developer productivity team. So basically, we built a lot of the infrastructure that connected and communicated with the fleet, a lot of getting data off the vehicles, data analysis type tooling, and then a lot of the developer productivity. So how we, the tools that people use to debug and inspect the vehicles, and that was sort of what ultimately led to Foxglove. We can get to that soon.
I mean, autonomous driving is interesting, especially, and here I think it shows. You said that robotics is not something that you can conquer with one skill set. You need a bunch of people with very specific skill sets, right? They are very different from each other, and you were mentioning the difference between hardware and software, right? So you being a guy with a computer science background, is not naturally. Because I have a background in mechanical engineering, so this seems like a clash of two worlds, right? And
right.
I had a few people in the podcast that said to be able to do the things I wanted to do, I really need to understand the other side and become a software engineer, or I need to understand how mechanics are really working, right? So this is interesting, but seeing so many big players with deep pockets being in the game for quite a while and then dropping out, and Apple is just one example.
Right.
It shows that
and
this
Cruise now, GM's just recently canceled Cruise, so
I wasn't sure about. I mean, I read about them stepping out, but I was not 100% sure if that means the end of it, right? So I haven't digged too deep into it. So, but that shows this is hard. This is like very, very hard, right? And but you said getting out of this, or was it still on the winning trajectory, or what was the moment where you felt, okay, now it's time for me to move on? What was that? Something that was because of Cruise, or was that because of Adrian? What
that was because of me. I think I never 5 years at Cruise. Up until then, I don't think I'd stayed at a company for more than 2 years or something before that. So even through my whole time at Cruise, I knew that after that I was gonna want to go and do another attempt at a startup. And I knew that developer tools was always something that has interested me, even long before I got into robotics and self-driving. I was always interested in developer tools and some of the things like Git and CI/CD, and just generally speaking, even back when I was at Coinbase, it was like, how do we improve the workflow of everyone else? How can we do to make people more productive and make it easier to work with the code base? that was sort of always something that I enjoyed spending time on, because I always enjoyed making other people productive. And so a lot of my work at Cruise was that too, was how do we build better tools for the autonomous driving engineers, because the tools don't exist in that industry, right? So that was something I was kind of always drawn to. And towards the end of my time at Cruise, it just felt natural. I 5 years is sort of enough time, especially for a like impatient entrepreneurial type. 5 years is a long time to work anywhere. So
Yeah,
I was
true.
still I was still very work anywhere where you're not working for yourself, I guess. Like I said, I was still very bullish on Cruise at the time. I thought they were on a good track. And I mean, until GM GM recently has just cancelled basically the level 4, the sort of robotaxi product, and has closed in Cruise. I think they want to keep a lot of the team enrolled into GM's kind of sort of level 2, level 3. This is maybe terminology that listeners might not be familiar with, but generally speaking, like they want to roll it into just building things that they can ship in GM cars today, rather than more of a robotaxi. But at the time, Cruise was doing really well when I left, and I thought they were in a good position. And I would say Cruise at the time had probably the second best technology in the industry, slightly behind Waymo. And Waymo had a head start of, I think maybe at least 5 years head start on Cruise. Waymo started way back in the sort of 2000s, in the late 2000s. So I was very positive, very bullish about Cruise when I left, but I felt that I had been there a long time. I had grown a lot of teams. I had built a lot of, me and my teams had built a lot of things, but I felt like it was time to go to a startup again. And the sort of the concept of Foxglove was really just a natural extension of what I'd been doing at Cruise, because what I had seen at Cruise was that what it took to get a self-driving car on the road, and they did sort of eventually get on the road. They're driving around San Francisco with no one in the front seat, which was a huge achievement. But I'd seen what it took to achieve that, and I'd seen how much we had to build internally. And this was kind of how much like was the bottom of the iceberg, I guess, in terms of what are all the engineers at Cruise doing. Well, 80% of them, 90% of them aren't building like novel, model architectures or things like this, right? Like the bulk of them are building the infrastructure, the machine that builds the machine. A lot of them are building the data infrastructure and the ML infrastructure and the tooling for analysis and verification. And how do you compare different releases, and how do you make sure that this release is better than the last release? And we just spent like an enormous amount of time and effort on those types of problems. And again, sort of, I guess, thinking back to before joining Cruise, I'd done a lot of like web stuff, and most of the problems in the web space are kind of, most of the like technological problems in the web space are solved. Like an average web startup, even like a Coinbase, doesn't spend anywhere near that much time on building kind of their tooling and infrastructure from scratch. They're not like building a database from scratch or something like that, right? And there's like tons of great open source off-the-shelf databases. So you grab all these things and you kind of glue them together and you build a product. And so I guess, coming out of Cruise, I had this 2-part thesis. And the first part of it was that I was just incredibly excited about the potential for autonomy and robotics in the world. And I sort of believed this, and this was sort of, it was kind of 2020 was around when I was sort of starting. I think I left Cruise sort of end of 2020. So throughout that year, I was sort of thinking a lot about this robotics problem. And part one was just, there is so much potential for robotics in the world, and I still believe this to be just ridiculously true. Because if we can make a car drive itself, around like downtown San Francisco, busy streets with pedestrians and cyclists and stuff, but like we don't have a self-driving tractor in an empty field, and we don't have a self-driving forklift, and we don't have a self-driving lawnmower. Like all of these things are like way, way, way easier than like driving around San Francisco, right? So you think from first principles. We have technology that can drive around a busy city street, but we don't have self-driving tractors. And then, and I guess also maybe, tying it back to growing up, and like I said, it was sort of quite a sort of New Zealand, a lot of small towns, a lot of agriculture, a lot of horticulture. Where I grew up was a big fruit growing industry. That's where they grow a lot of kiwis. And when I was in high school, my summers and college summers, I spent a lot of it working in fruit pack houses. So like, I spent like an entire summer just like loading empty boxes onto like a machine that stamps the boxes together into the correct shape. But like, I think back to this, right? And I'm like, that's such a manual job. And it was like ridiculously boring, right? And it was just repetitive. And you're just like, yeah, lift the boxes up, like, and then run around and put some more glue in the machine and then go back to like lifting boxes. These are just like kind of ridiculous tasks that like have not been automated yet. But like, so I think that, and I'm like, or just picking fruit, right? Picking fruit or pruning, all of these kind of things you have to do on orchards. But I was like, we have a car that can drive around San Francisco. So like, why haven't we gone and automated all this other stuff that's like objectively way easier? So I just, this is why I'm so excited about robotics, because I think the technology is already here. It's just like, we know how to develop it. It's too expensive to develop. You need to hire 2,000 engineers and that costs billions of dollars. And so, that kind of brings me to part two of my sort of thesis for Foxglove, which is that the industry is getting held back because you have to build everything from scratch. The industry is getting held back because you cannot be successful in building like a fully autonomous thing like that without hiring like thousands of people that win billions of dollars. And so this is something that we try to solve in a small part with Foxglove, is building developer tools for the robotics industry. And I guess this is also drawn by not just the cruise experience, but I went and talked to I knew a lot of people that were at Waymo and Tesla and Aurora and Zoox. And everyone, we all built the exact same, sit down and compare notes and be like, you built that version, you built that tool as well, we built that tool. It's like, why don't these things exist off the shelf, right? If every single, if the top 5 self-driving companies all built that same tool in-house, it needs to exist, and it's generally applicable even outside of self-driving to lots of other robotics companies. But the industry is not going to be successful if every single robot startup has to build that from scratch. Like, the industry cannot move forward unless there's a lot more sort of off-the-shelf things available.
I mean, you're obviously right in the builder mode, right? So why should I come up with something from scratch or from the bottom if there's someone else is doing some similar stuff, right? So I'm a huge fan of the open source community, and especially on X or Twitter, as I like to call it, is you see a lot of people sharing this, right? And I had Remy Cadenne from the Robot on my podcast a few episodes ago, and so these guys are doing a tremendous work, right? And
it's very cool.
Rob Knight was I saw him on the summit in December, on the Humanoid Summit, and having this arm and this hand and being able to print those parts and put them together through some documentation on GitHub and YouTube videos. So this is some democratization of in the space of robotics. Yeah. What you were saying is also problematic in the business sense, because people need to have this kind of mindset. Maybe there is some collaboration that we can do without interfering our business model or the product that we are building, right? So why not sharing the logistics, the resources, and all those things to then go straight in those directions we want to go, right? So there's not necessarily a fight about those modules that are necessary as tools for the other things, right? But when it comes to the automation part that you were mentioning, the monetization part is a big topic, right? You were mentioning hiring a lot of engineers, but it's just so much cheaper to have someone who's doing this manual versus having machines doing that, right? So you have a very high volume of parts that are very costly to make it worth having a machine, right? So there's a reason why a lot of things are still not automated yet. But
a lot of the things that are automated today in robotics are very repeatable tasks and very predictable, and they don't change much. And coming back to when I was making the fruit trays, the fruit boxes that they ship these things in, right? Like, the process of stamping it out was relative. You can load a tray, and then the process of the machine, like stamping it out, lining it with glue and stamping it, was like very repeatable. But the process of like running across the floor and getting trays of blanks from then maybe they're loading off a truck, and have all this kind of in between work that is always done with people, right? Loading those and then getting them over to where they're actually packing the fruit. Like, it's just, and everything has a different layout. It's kind of you definitely see this so far. Robots, at least, you think the last sort of maybe 50 years of industrial robots, it's always you think about like automotive manufacturing plant, things like this too, right? Like they have machines doing the very repeatable stuff, but there's a lot of stuff in between that is still done by humans, and there's this kind of huge potential. So then I guess you think about like, well, how can we automate more of this? Because a lot of this work is difficult or dangerous or repetitive, and so a lot of it sort of in theory could be automated, but we need more startups to be able to go and solve these types of problems. And I think a lot back to why the SaaS industry has been so successful over the past 20 years. I think it's in part because when you build a SaaS business today, you don't spend you have like almost no technology risk that you're taking on, right? When you build, like most sort of vertical SaaS businesses today are solving a product and kind of a product market fit risk, right? So they go out and talk to some customers and hear about a problem, and then they glue like 5 or 10 sort of off-the-shelf things together, a bunch of open source libraries and some commercial services, and you want to send some SMS or send an email, or AWS hosting or whatever, but like you glue all of this off-the-shelf stuff together, and then you like talk to customers and you solve their problem. You like solve a product market fit problem. Whereas like in robotics today, most robotic startups are taking on like incredible technology risk, and probably a lot of the other founders that you talk to, right? A lot of them have sort of like very obvious kind of product problems and product market fit problems. Like, yeah, if the robot could do that, like, yeah, amazing. Like if the car can drive itself, yeah, that's amazing. Can you make it drive itself? And so like, you come back to sort of this like technology risk, and most, by and large, most robotics companies are having to build even just like the autonomy itself, right? And this has parallels to the sort of current wave of AI companies, because if you wanted to start an AI for a legal contract review company 5 years ago, like, good luck to you. Go and hire like a team of 30 PhDs and start building all of this crap from scratch. And then now it's like, once that technology becomes democratized, it becomes available off the shelf as like a modular thing that you can just take and use. Now you can build a company where all you have to do is solve the product problem, because you're like, oh, the AI thing is like, I'm hand waving, but like the AI thing is like basically solved, right? Like we just figure out the prompts and we need to like fine tune it a little bit, but like we can solve a product problem now. We can take that, like the AI model, we can wrap it, and we can build like a nice user interface. We can focus on our go-to-market, focus on our marketing, focus on like our UX and our polish, and we can build like a nice product around it. Robotics hasn't got there yet, right? Robotics is still at the stage of like, you need a team of PhDs to be able to achieve this, and every robotics company is building their sort of their autonomy stack from scratch, pretty much. They may be using like a couple of modules here and there, but they're all building like the entire autonomy stack from scratch. So I think the SaaS industry over the past 20 years, especially the past 15 years, was wildly successful once all of those kind of components became available off the shelf. And we're just starting to see that kind of wave with AI, LLMs, and image sort of generative image and stuff now, but we haven't got there with robots. Robots are still at this point where all of the pieces are not available off the shelf yet. And so we're not going to see, well, we're sort of, and we're trying to solve a little part of that at Foxglove, but like as more and more of that becomes available, then we will see the wave of robotics, because I think you want to see in sort of 10 years from now, starting a robotics startup should be much easier. It's still never going to be as easy as a startup, but it should be much, much easier, where largely you can take a bunch of off the shelf things, and then you end up with, with thousands, with tens of thousands, with potentially hundreds of thousands of robotics startups that are mostly pulling together a few off-the-shelf modules and components and off-the-shelf hardware and plugging it together, and then like solving like the product problem, solving the UX, solving the go-to-market, solving their sales, solving operations, and hand-holding with their customers, but like not having to take on kind of that technology risk.
You are now building the company, and maybe you can, as we're coming towards the end of the podcast, maybe you can take us a little bit with how it was to build Foxglove. Was the initial idea behind it, and where do you guys where do you see the fit of use, and where you're going towards to and within the next few years?
Yeah, definitely. So like I say, I left Cruise with this sort of appreciation for what it took to build a self-driving car, but also like the tools and infrastructure layer that needed to exist to do that. And I wanted to build a company around not just building those tools and infrastructure for, I could have just gone to a different robotic startup and like built the same thing, right? But I'm like, why am I building this for one company? Why can't we just build this for the whole industry? So the thesis is basically unchanged, which is like, let's be a tools and infrastructure company for the entire industry rather than just one company. And we started with this visualization problem. Visualization and sort of debugging generally in robotics is a very hard problem because a lot of the sort of traditional software development has very kind of much more black and white type of debugging, right? So like a traditional software application, you want to figure out like what's going wrong with it. You can put in some log statements. You just like print out some text, or you can put out a bunch of metrics about like how long did this take, and then you can look at it on average. But it generally comes down to like sort of time series, numeric data, and text data is like all you're really getting out of it. And you want to debug it, then you can go and look at all the text, or you can use sort of breakpoint debugger, and you can step through it, and you can say, okay, I can see what happened here. Printed out the user entered blah blah blah, their credit card number, blah blah blah. Like it's all very sort of like black and white. And then you get to debugging a robot, and you're like, well, if I just print out, well, this is what was I seeing through the camera? So I just print out, this is what my current understanding of the 3D world was. This is my perception. This is like all the different objects that I could kind of understand in 3D space. You can't just print that out as text. Like it would be nonsensical to look at. It would just be a giant array, and you would have no idea what it meant. So you need this kind of concept of like an interactive sort of 3D debugger, 3D visualization tool. And that was one of the first things that we actually built at Cruise. We started building this tool. One of my teams at Cruise started building this tool back in 2017. And so that was the first thing that we started with Foxglove, because we knew that it was just a big pain point. We knew that the existing available tools in the industry were not that good. And yes, we started with this kind of visualization problem. And then we also pretty early on paired that with like cloud, especially cloud data management. So you've got a bunch of robots out in the field, you get data off them. You want to be able to share that data among team members. Maybe you've got operations team, maybe you've got different development teams. You want to be able to easily have everyone looking at the same piece of data, and without having to sort of, and it sounds silly, but a lot of workflows in robotics are quite often like stick the USB drive into the robot and then like run back to your desk and stick the USB drive into your laptop, and then like you look at it, and then the person next to you is like, oh, can I have a look at that? And you're like, okay, hold on, I'll like share this file to you, like, Google Drive or something. Like there's a lot of like very kind of janky workflows. So, we're like, okay, well, let's, take this visualization and not just, I can work directly locally on a robot, but also I want to be able to, connect to the cloud and be able to share things across different like team members and things. And then also quite early on, as soon as we started thinking about that cloud data, and again, this is where some of the things, we're sort of talking early on about, you start with the problem space you want to solve, but you don't, well, ideally you start with sort of a general problem space you're interested in, and some understanding of solutions, but it's best not to come into it with too much opinions. And so, quite early on, or come in with some opinions, but like be prepared to be wrong. And so like a couple of things that were sort of surprising to us quite early on, which, in hindsight weren't so surprising, but they're nonetheless. One thing was that we discovered that actually just logging of robotics data was something where there was an enormous amount of reinventing the wheel happening. So we kind of came in with this idea of like, well, we'll help you store data in the cloud and we'll help you visualize it and log it. And then we went out and talked to companies, and like half of the companies we talked to had written their own logging kind of framework that had a custom binary log format. So it was just like half of the companies we spoke to were just like logging like binary data in a completely bespoke proprietary protocol that they had invented, because there was not like any sort of open standards out there. So generally speaking, like the ROS ecosystem, robot operating system, is an open source project, and people that were using ROS that had a kind of built-in logging stack, but like half of the industry was not using ROS, and every single company we talked to had created their own different log file format. And I was like, well, we have no hope of, like the industry is not going to work if everyone is like building their own log format. Like, what are you guys doing? Like, go solve customer problems. Like, go like solve product market fit. Don't like invent a log format from scratch. So we ended up.
But I mean, you do need to be honest about. I mean, there's a lot of historical reasons about this, right? Why this had happened, and especially data and making data available, and especially if you talk to automotive, no one likes the cloud, right? They are very, very antique people in the manufacturing space. So when you're using the word cloud, AI they somehow like, because they know there's a hype around it. But when you talk about cloud, then everyone is freezing, because the infrastructure at those German automotive, but automotive in general, or old industries is very antique, and the IT infrastructure is organic. It grew organically, so there's very old infrastructure here, and it's a pain, and because you need to be reliable for all the other versions behind that, right? So a new startup has it much easier, but it has it very hard to get into that space, because they are so protected about all the history they build, right?
Yeah, and it takes a long time for these things to sort of trickle. I guess it's more of like trickle up into enterprise. Like a lot of trends start in much smaller companies, but yeah, we our team had built like a lot of the logging stack at Cruise, so we ended up creating the we're like, hey, we have to solve this first. So we ended up building the MCAP file format. Was like a open source project we created. Coming back to your point, like we want to sort of create these open source components are great for the industry, because it sort of helps everybody sort of share and benefit from it. So we created this MCAP file format, and that started getting a lot of traction. So logging was one thing that we sort of did not plan to solve, but we ended up getting into. And then the other thing was also just sort of communication with the robot and getting data off robots. Again, we just sort of were a little bit blind to that, because it was sort of a solved problem at Cruise, because we had so many engineers, and it was just one of many things that we solved. But as we talk to more and more companies, like just getting data off robots to the cloud, or to it doesn't even have to be the cloud, it can just be whatever data center they're using. But getting data off robots to the cloud also turned out to be a sort of a problem that everyone was struggling with, and everyone was writing from scratch. And some of these concepts around rolling record and keeping data locally, and then only uploading sort of events that go wrong. We just sort of realized that there was much a much broader problem space besides just the debugging tools. So this whole kind of like sort of life cycle of data logging on robots and getting it to the cloud and making it available. So that was where I think, just tying it back to the start where you said, find a problem space that you're excited about, bring some opinions about sort of what is needed to solve that, and ideally bring prior experience that you have from the industry. Like it's not, you're sort of not setting yourself up for the best success if you go try to solve a problem in an industry that you've got no prior working experience in. But even if you do have experience, like you're probably going to be wrong once you start. Maybe you've only seen one perspective. You've only seen how one company did it internally, or you've talked to a couple of friends and how 3 companies have done it internally. But once you go and talk to like 100 companies, you're going to get a much like broader industry, broader understanding of like what the problems are.
But this is definitely something that because I'm talking to a lot of startup founders that are they have a little bit of technology, they had a little bit of experience, they're fresh out of university, they would like to do something full of energy, and then I said, sit down and talk to 100 people, and then more if this idea that you have is really worth building, because you need someone who thinks, is this worth paying for?
Yeah.
I think we can go for much longer time, but I try to keep it around an hour. What I really like is the idea of yours, because ROS is not widely adopted in industry. Let's say it's non-existing. It's more an academic lab kind of thing, right? So if you
I would say it's probably like it's more widely adopted than people get it credit for. Not many people talk about it, but like across all of our across like paying Foxglove customers who are using ROS, are building commercial robots, I'd say it's at least half of them are using ROS. So it's it has adoption in the industry, but it's not it's not ubiquitous. There's a lot of other things that people are doing out there.
True. So if you, because this is a podcast for other people who would like to build a deep tech company. So if there's, I mean, it sounds like a cliche, but if there's something that you could give the younger Adrian on the way, let's say when you were leaving New Zealand or Australia, what would it be? What would be one of the things that you think, if I would have known that one? I mean, most likely it's not one thing, but if you could go for one.
Yeah. I think something, and certainly like my experience, like the energy of youth and the excitement to build something is great. Like don't lean into that and build things, and start a side business and do something in your spare time if you want, but realize that you will have a lot of blind spots, and you will probably achieve your goals faster if you if you go and work at a company that is similar to the type of company you want to start, and ideally you go and work at a company when they're quite small, like in the like less than 100 people, ideally less than 50 people, when you're joining the company, but that it has either a strong founder or backing from strong VCs or other indications that they're probably going to be successful. And also, even if they don't succeed, you're still going to learn a ton. But you will learn more about what maybe you know a lot about hardware, but you don't know a lot about software. Maybe you know a lot about hardware and software. You don't know anything about sales. You don't know anything about business operations. You don't know anything about legal. You don't know anything about government relations, or it depends on what kind of company. But sure, you want to build a rocket company. Okay, that's great. Like, what do you know about government affairs? So like, just realize that like it's nobody knows everything, and you're going to have to surround yourself with people that know that. But going and working at a company that is sort of similar to the one that you want to start is probably while they are small, not joining 1,000 or 2,000 person, or don't go and work at Google or something. It's not going to help you. And also it doesn't count if it's like a innovation team in a big company. It doesn't count. Like there's no like real sort of jobs are on the line. Like you're sort of like operating in a little bit of a dreamland. Go and work at like a startup with ideally less than 50 people that has like good founders, good backing, and is doing the kind of thing that you want to do, so that you get to know. You can just sit down at lunch and you can talk to the person doing legal. You can talk to the person doing sales. You can kind of get to know that, like, what type of person it takes to do that at that type of company, so that then when you go to be a founder, because let's say you're 23 and you're excited to build a manufacturing company, a rocket company, or something like that. Great, that's awesome, and you probably will, but you're going to have a hard time convincing a world-class like salesperson to come and join that company. True. Like, and so like I say, you hear the outlier stories. You hear about like, oh yeah, blah blah blah, like Zuck started Facebook in his dorm room. Okay, that's true. But this is kind of like, the 1% of the 1%. Realize that if that's you, you probably wouldn't even be listening to this podcast. So like, just assume that you're not part of the like 0.01%. Assume that you're part of like everybody else, and that you're going to have to learn a lot of things along the way. And you're going to have to make a lot of connections. And if you go and work at an early stage company, you can get to know those people. You can make some friends, and guess what? Some of them will make great co-founders, because you don't want to start a company without co-founders, number one, and you don't want to start a company with people that you've like never worked with before, or that you've only just met. So it's also great networking. My co-founder at Foxglove, we met at Coinbase 11 years ago now, and we worked at Coinbase and we worked at Cruise. So we've been working together for 11 years now, right? And so you just have a much tighter working relationship with people that you've worked with before.
There's a lot of truth in that. And I do hope that people take a lot from this episode. I'm really happy that you said yes. I do think that I need to spend a little bit more time with the tool itself. To be honest, I haven't got too deep into that one, but I'm happy that you said yes. And let's see. I asked you earlier on, when will you be in Europe, because I'm planning to do some live episodes. But you said
let's do
not necessarily planned very soon, but I might be in the US sooner. So let's see what happens.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, no, definitely. Let's do it. You're in Berlin, you said?
No, I'm now living south of Stuttgart. So
okay, cool.
In the heart of the automotive industry.
Yeah, I've been there a couple of times. Yeah, cool city.
So, thanks for staying with us and giving such insights. I wish you guys all the best, and looking forward to hear from you again.
Awesome. Thanks, Celia.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.